Olav Aleksander Bu, welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
Thank you. It's really fun to be here. I actually remember I was in Sierra Nevada, and there we for the fun we made this annual Tri Summit, we call it. And then actually I remember Gustav, he had been in contact with you as well, because he wanted to have some insight on some of the topics that you had been, covering before. So I know your show quite well, and yeah, it's an honor to be on.
Olav, it's been a Norwegian. The world of endurance sports, the world of triathlon in particular, has just been Norwegian dominated this year with the Olympic victory, Kristian Blummenfelt, the Cozumel Ironman world record that just fell only a matter of weeks ago. And of course, Gustav Eden's 70.3 Ironman title defense. It is just going from strength to strength. And your role with Triathlon Norway is as an Olympic coach and sports scientist. Can you just sort of paint a picture around what the last 12 plus months have looked like for you day to day and on an annual basis?
Yeah, well, last year has been very special, but mostly because of also COVID. So normally I would, so I'm responsible for the Olympic program with altitude training, heat training, and of course the Olympic preparations. But normally what I do, because I have a family at home, 2 kids and a wife, I normally try to split it up so that when I go on the camps with the guys and girls, I stay there for, depending a little bit on duration of the camp, but try to stay not more than, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks away maximum, and then I go home, and then I go back at the camp with the guys and girls. And the last year, of course, because of the COVID, it has made it quite challenging to travel between countries, especially Norway, because of restrictions. So we actually ended up being on camp almost continuously since very long camps in 2020, and then more or less continuous camp for most of the athletes since January, I say until the Olympics, more or less. Yeah, a few of them had a short trip home and then went back at camp, but more or less we've been continuous on camp. And because for me, going home, I needed to go into quarantine. It really didn't make sense to do so. So instead of being away for 2-3 weeks and then go home for maybe a week and then go back for 2-3 weeks, this year I had camps lasting for 5 weeks where I was present with the athletes, and then I could go home, where we basically shifted them from one camp to another camp or so on. So my day-to-day work with the athletes have been everything from, I'll say, coaching in the training and so, but also continuously reviewing the training we do every day with the athletes, going through to understand a little bit how was it compared to what we planned, what should we do better to the next session. So we do this more or less every day when we're together, to individualization, because athletes respond differently to the program that we have. So inside that program, let's say overall program, I do the individualization of the athletes. So Kristian needs a little bit different stimulus than Gustav and Kasper, Lotte, Solveig, Stine, and so on. And then of course it's the testing that we have done much more in the field the last year compared to previous year, because it's been much harder to go home and go into the laboratory. So we brought the laboratory out into the field together with developing also better field laboratory technology. Leading several of the projects that with everything from developing the cockpit that we had to the suit that we used, developing new methods to quantify the performance of the different stuff and so on. So it's been a massive year, massive investment, massive, all kinds of aspects.
But there's no surprise with such attention to detail and rigorous execute review that the success has been there. When did you start working with the Norwegian triathlon team, Olav? Was that post Rio?
No, actually, I started working with Ariel and Kristian. That was in 2015, leading into Rio. But my role in 2015 was basically more to collect as much as possible data and try to understand where we could make a difference going past Rio. So actually my role into Rio was, I didn't do, I wasn't involved in the coaching or this kind of thing. It was basically more monitoring. And of course, if there was something that I saw that maybe they could pay attention to, I would give them a heads up. But in reality, that was very, very little. It was more monitoring and preparing for post Rio.
So where the obvious question there, Olav, is where did the difference come? You collected the data, you monitored it, and it's a big question, obviously, with many layers to it. But what do you think made the difference for such stunning performances that we saw in Tokyo? And let's not forget that the Olympic champion Kristian Blummenfelt is a Norwegian, taking victory in the most arduous, humid, hot, ambient temperature conditions you could find.
I think actually that the biggest difference actually came from that before Rio, they had just started using power meters. They have just started to use lactate meters. They were actually only using heart rate for a very long time, I think until 14, 15, probably. That was where we introduced power meters. But one of the things that I saw quite quickly, because I also started to do some profiling, substrate profiling of Kristian as well during training. And one of the things that I did see was that he was using too much glycogen at a too low work rate. And Kristian is extremely tough in his mind. All of these athletes are, and I'll say when you come to this level, you are obviously quite tough in your mind. And the little bit the disadvantage with this is that some athletes just have a natural talent for feeling their intensity or knowing where to stay. Most of them will probably just push too hard because they can and because they're strong enough mentally, physically. And that means also that what I very often see is that they get a little bit too, let's say, glycogen thirsty already at too low intensities. And in an event like triathlon, where you have basically almost the same work duration as a marathon, you can't have a profile that makes you use glycogen at a very low work intensity. It needs to be you want to burn fats up to a very high intensity and sparingly use glycogen, especially spare as much as possible until you come for the run, so that basically you have almost full tanks and can go as fast as possible. So intensity control, they were also using 4 millimoles. That was a little bit the proxy they used for to look at their threshold, either that or baseline plus 1.5. They were shifting a little bit between the two, but they did no individualization. And there was no understanding of lactate at that point. So that was actually the first thing, and where I saw there was the biggest gains to be made. I'm not gonna say how much they actually increased in race power for the same, let's say, it was so, just by actually paying attention to intensity, it made a huge difference for the guys over the next 6 to 9 months after Rio. So when we were in Sierra Nevada in the spring of 2017, things were starting really to look good already at that point. So,
so quite a few layers there, Olav. the better understanding intensity control, individualization of obviously the data, understanding lactate better, trying to spare glycogen until the athlete gets onto the run. So they're all various levers that were pulled. Obviously, attention shifted quickly from the success in Tokyo, and Gustav and Kasper on the male side both had solid races. I know there was some disappointment from those athletes, and I know there was a reflection around how they might be individualized better for their lead in. Anything you'd sort of add to the team's overall performance outside of the obviously the victory from Kristian Blummenfelt? Any learnings that you've taken individually?
The funny thing was that actually, because I was standing at the finish line, and then after, when I went through the press area, this was 15 minutes after Kristian had just came over the finish line. There was one media. They asked me, "So how are you going to celebrate the victory of Kristian tonight?" And I said, "Well, that I haven't thought of." And because my mind was already starting to think of Paris 2024, what we could do different or better for 2024. I think that one of the, of course, the limitations we have is that, and I think is a little bit difficult to understand, is that this level, I'll say, we can't, in business life, I think you would probably call this diminishing return on investment, because at some point, basically investment just go exponential compared to what you're trying to achieve. But in sports where you are basically fighting for the gold medal, you can't neglect diminishing return. You just have to invest as much as possible where you can. And the Norwegian program we have had very limited resources, both in terms of funding, but also in terms of people that have been, had the possibility to be involved in making this possible. And of course, there are many things that you want to do, but you just see that with the resources you have, you're not able to do it. And I would say the takeaway from Tokyo mostly was that I had some clear action points in my head of what I wanted to do a little bit different with Kasper, what I wanted to do a little bit. Well, Gustav, I don't think there was much different to do with Gustav, because the problem with Gustav was that he got a respiratory virus or something like this that we weren't able to find out what it was. He went through, I don't know how many examinations, but I think in the end it also started to solve itself. But he was a little bit more unstable that summer leading into the competition. So I think, and also at that point, everybody is a little bit more nervous. You don't want to talk down your performance, or maybe you don't want to take in the reality of your performance and these kind of things. But I think, yeah, Gustav and Kasper, it is actually just more about individualization. I'll say really understanding better how to say the specific needs in specific situations for each of the athletes. And for Kasper, it was more clear. Gustav, I don't know actually really what or how much. There, of course, there are some things, but I really don't know if. Because he could easily have had a day as well in the Olympics too. I think if it hadn't been for the sicknesses and these kind of things that had been that summer. So that's at least how I recollect it at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Olav. If we jump over to long course triathlon in Cozumel, Mexico, 7:21:12, the new Ironman world record. We'll talk about the preparation in a moment, but I asked Kristian recently what percentage he would give himself on an overall scorecard for his performance. His reply was 89%, Olav. I'm going to ask you, as the driving force behind his programming leading into Cozumel, what percentage grade you would give him, obviously out of 100% there, Olav?
I haven't thought about it in percentage, but if Kristian says it 89%, I believe him. But I know I know that we got more to extract because it was his debut. Even though we had a very tough program leading into Cozumel to prepare him, we didn't do a full Ironman preparing it, and as we also see in training, it is always, how say, swimming do affect the cycling do affect the running performance. If you only do a run session, you can run really fast on it. So Kristian, Gustav, Kasper, so on, they can run very fast on a marathon if they only did that in training. But because in Ironman you have actually been swimming first, you have been biking first, it also will affect your running. So what we do know is that hindsight, of course, the swim was fast. It was a downstream current. He could have gone faster, but one of the things we discussed leading into the race was that it wouldn't make sense for him actually to try to go away or break away and then maybe get like 1 or 2 minutes on the swim, because it's a really long day. And then on the bike, what we actually hoped for was that some of the bikers would just just go all in and try to bridge up with Kristian so that he would have somebody to work together with on a bike. And then on the run, we knew anyway that he was much faster than all the others. So it was not that we were afraid of the competition, but of course we were talking more about the record. Of course, we wanted to go fast, even faster than Gustav had. Maybe that was one. Like Gustav said, now I set the bar for how fast you need to go. For Kristian, of course, they have a little bit friendly competition. So that was, of course, one driver behind it. And then, of course, it was the Ironman record that was a little bit faster than what Gustav had done in Florida, which was 7 hours, 40 minutes. And then, of course, we knew that if the day were there and everything was looking good, he could maybe even beat Jan's let's say, ultimate iron distance record. So both the Ironman and iron distance record. So how to say, hindsight, I would say that swim, he could have gone maybe a few minutes faster if he just went a little bit harder, still controlled. Biking, there we ended up with a misfortune. We ended up with some tires we couldn't replace some tires that were really worn, and he was running a tire wheel system that we couldn't get spare or new tires for where we were. So we ended up actually having to fit butyl. That was the only thing. We also didn't get hold of latex, so we had to fit butyl tubes inside hookless or tubeless tires. So this, of course, increases the friction in the system too, which was not ideal. And then also one limitation we knew already from the bike that we couldn't do anything with was that we want to shift Kristian a little bit more forward on the saddle to get his back flatter, but also to be able to engage more of his muscles or distribute it more evenly over his muscles. But we actually had the saddle as far forward we could. We couldn't go for a short nose saddle. This more like with wider prongs that he normally prefers, but we had to use a long nose saddle. But even then, we were actually not able to bring it far enough forward. So we were actually not too far away from the UCI rules, actually, when it comes to saddle position. And of course, we also are doing now work on the cockpit, but that wasn't ready for that. So we know already there, for the bike, we can shave off more time just from the tires, from the position, from the cockpit, and so on. And also, of course, more training, just getting more training, racing Ironman as well. On the run, there we already trained for 2:30 marathon. I think that actually the limit we have been playing around from a physiological perspective. Where are probably the breaking 2 limit in an Ironman? So what's the breaking 2 in Ironman when it comes to the marathon run? And there we think it is actually somewhere probably between 2:20 and 2:25. Whether we will get there within next year, I'm not sure, but that we get closer to 2:25 on the marathon, that I'm fairly convinced about on the, let's say, on the right day, right track with the right people in the mix. I think that's for sure is doable as well. So performance-wise, I knew he had more left in the tank, and he clearly showed that for the last 5K on his run, where it just went progressive and really put in going faster, and then ended up running 3:30 the last K or so in towards the finish line. So, and I'll say I'm not sure if Kristian have told, but he actually also had a diarrhea leading into the race, and of course that's not ideal because you really need to fill up and nutrition wise and so on before the race. So yeah, there are many things. So maybe that's account for an 11%. So 89%. Let's give it. let's make it that.
And Kristian did share that, Olav, and he also shared that his toilet stops on the run were 1:43. So he knows he can shave off 1:43 for the 2 toilet stops. Olav, in terms of the block leading into the Ironman debut and the subsequent world record, there wasn't a lot of turnaround time from the end of the World Triathlon Series, of which Kristian took out the World Triathlon Series title, and getting ready for the Ironman. It started in earnest with him jumping on the time trial bike. How many weeks of preparation was there specifically for Cozumel?
For Cozumel, I think it was 7 weeks of training, 5 weeks at Sierra Nevada and 2 weeks in Cozumel. We were discussing whether we needed 3 weeks or 2 weeks depending on the heat there, but the conditions that we got on race day was I think it was 28 degrees and 80% humidity or something like this. So it's actually quite similar to Tokyo, in fact. But from when I started researching the heat protocols and making the heat program and monitoring the guys quite closely for how long time they need to acclimatize, we knew that Kristian needs somewhere between 7 to 10 days to acclimatize for something like that. And of course, when you go from Sierra Nevada, you don't know 100% because it's a little bit different also from what we have done in the past, because Sierra Nevada at that time it's colder, it's also much drier, and that's not good, because typically what happens when you go to altitude is that you actually start to lose plasma because it is thinner air, so you start to ventilate more, and it's drier air, so because of that you also lose, you don't get the same amount of humidity into your body when you're breathing in, but you are breathing out quite a lot of humidity. So typically you will lose more plasma when you go to altitude. So we tried to mitigate that, and then we decided that okay, we think we have a good plan, and we monitored very closely his hematocrit all the way to Sierra Nevada. So we felt that we had pretty good control of that, and then we saw that okay, 2 weeks should be enough for Cozumel. So that would make it 7 weeks, actually 7 weeks preparation after what was the last race he did? That was the Super League race, League race. So in completely other side of the spectrum. And then a week off, and then 7 weeks preparation into Cozumel.
And in Kristian's YouTube videos, of which lead into Cozumel, you feature heavily driving the car, doing skids, and performing tests. You talk about some of these key objectives of the training block being to overall raise the bar in Ironman, to maintain a high VO2 and develop fatigue resistance, and to keep the VO2 high instead of just focusing on efficiency. Kristian asks you in one of the videos to explain it, and this is in simple terms, and this is what you shared.
Can you say the reason why we do this? Intensity block, and then the Ironman block, then intensity again.
So first of all, of course, you're going back to Paris 2024. So we could on one sense maybe say this is a detour, but on the other side also, you have an extremely high energy expenditure, so you are able to turn around, a lot of calories into work, and that makes it possible to actually, if you don't have much sessions, you have to prioritize the Ironman sessions. But the more work you can do, the more you can start to vary a little bit. And what we are trying to do when we do the intensity session is to try to raise the ceiling, and then the volume session where we're doing more Ironman specific, we're trying to lift up the pace even faster than what we have seen before. But this again is the first Ironman cycle we are ever doing, or first Ironman block we ever doing. So we still got some learning, but I think based on all the science and stuff we have done, I have a good feeling that we are on track for something cool.
We are on track for something cool, i.e. a world record. So can you just explain that a little bit more about the high energy expenditure you mentioned earlier about Kristian's profile using too much glycogen at low work rates, but is that similar or different to the high energy expenditure that he has? Similar or different?
No, that's different actually. For me, energy expenditure is basically just how much energy, independently of where you get it from, that you are able to turn over. And of course, one measure, one of the metrics that one use very often for that is of course the VO2 max. And then of course there has been there is also another more theoretical metric which is called VLA max, but we don't use VLA max directly as a metric. I use that more like just for something to check, but we look more at the fractional utilization of oxygen at race pace compared to your VO2 max. Those two would be interrelated. But where it started, that was more intensity control, of course, and that's more where do you get your energy from? Do you get it from the glycolysis? Do you get it from or glycogen or fats, more or less, carbohydrates, fats. While energy expenditure, you can imagine that speed is a function of power and efficiency. So basically, if your speed, that's a function of how much power you can produce and at what efficiency. So if you have a poor efficiency, a lot of that power you're producing, you're wasting it in let's say directions that are not bringing you towards your finish line. Very efficient athletes, of course, they more or less a big portion of the power goes towards bringing them towards the finish line. And of course, that also changes. It's not like that. Very often, when they try to measure efficiency, they normally go into a laboratory. But the disadvantage very often with the standard protocols that are being used is that you test it fresh. You don't test it when it's fatigued or after a certain amount of kilojoules of work done at a certain power output, or let's say race-specific power output. So when it comes to energy expenditure, you can imagine that the ultimate ceiling for speed is power. So power you can never go faster than than 100% of your power, or let's say that you're producing. But the power you're producing can never be, so the mechanical power you are producing can never be higher than your total energy expenditure either. So we know that big portion of the energy you are expending is going to heat, and then there's a portion of it that goes into mechanical work. And this is one of the things that I'm actually working there. To put it this way, the program that I'm actually working on, there are a lot of people behind the program. So I'm working with people from Canada, from Switzerland, Netherlands, Norway, obviously, and several other locations where we are developing technology that allows us to collect more data real time and continuously over long times to really see the bigger picture. But energy expenditure there was a paper coming out in last year, or was it this year, I think, that where they had been looking at the maximum sustainable energy expenditure for humans. And then they had been doing this on some Tour de France cyclists, and they had been doing this on some ultra runners. And of course, these are elites, so the best of the best in the world in cycling and so on. What they saw was that the maximum sustainable energy expenditure that was for these athletes was 2.5 times their resting metabolic rate. Kristian is higher, or all our athletes. I haven't measured all our athletes, but Kristian I have measured, and I'm measuring also. Gustav is joining. How to say now? Me and our program. Or the program I'm after the Olympics. I shifted my focus onto Kristian primarily, and that was agreed with the whole team that I would shift my focus entirely onto Kristian because of the Sub-7 project, and so. Now Gustav decided that he will join into the program as well, but I'm doing something that is called doubly labeled water. So that's actually it's water that has been, so the coffee you drink, water you drink, everything you drink basically have isotopes in that. But what you do with why it's called doubly labeled water is that in that water you are basically adding isotopes, so it's deuterium and oxygen 18 isotopes to the water. So when you drink this bottle of water, the funny thing is that a half a liter of water costs 1,800 euro. So it's very expensive drink. And it doesn't taste anything, it doesn't do anything for you, except that what we can do is that when Kristian is now urinating, I would every morning or evening, I would come into his room and he is urinating into a small glass. And then I'm basically taking this urine from the glass into some small glass sealed containers. And then we analyze that in a mass spectrometer. And then we can see basically the reduction in isotopes as the days go by and so on. And this way we can how to say, do a very non-invasive, non-intrusive method for mapping his energy expenditure. And you can imagine now that the more energy, the more calories you can burn, the more training you can do, obviously. The less energy you have available, or you can do before you end into a fatigued state, or you are, how to say, you are starting to lose weight or these kind of things. The more specific you have to be in your training. So obviously, if you only had like a few hours a week for training, I would only prioritize training Ironman specific, just Ironman specific training. But at some point, if you have more energy available so that you can expend or you can burn, now you can start to do more training. So now it makes sense to maybe do some training that goes a little bit higher intensity, or something that goes a little bit lower intensity. And at some point, when you really start to become fast, it makes sense to also, how to say, you want to bring everything higher up. You want to bring your race pace up. But if we know that your race pace is basically hammered by your let's say your anaerobic threshold, because your or maximum active steady state, because your race pace in Ironman will be closer to your little bit above your fat max or LT1. So when you want to go faster now, we need to bring this up. So how do we bring this up? Well, basically it's a function of your glycolysis and your VO2 max. So what we need to do is to raise the VO2 max even higher up. And we also want at the same time to bring the fractional utilization of oxygen even higher up. So basically your race pace also comes higher up towards your VO2 max. Of course, it's not possible to bring it all the way up. And maybe we could go that faster by bleeding off maybe a little bit more VO2 max as well. But the whole concept is basically about that everything is limited by to put it in just pure physical terms, you could say that your 1 hour power will always be lower than your 30-minute power. Your 30-minute power will always be lower than your 15-minute power. Your 15-minute power and so on will be lower than 5-minute power and so on. And if you at some point ending up having a 60-minute power, or let's go a little bit shorter duration, if you say that your 30-minute power starts to become very close to your 15-minute power, basically it will be almost impossible to develop your 30-minute power very much more. And then maybe you can extend it so you can go a little bit longer, but the problem is that let's say your 15-minute power now becomes a limitation. Okay, that's not physiological speaking, but give an impression of it. So you need to raise the ceiling, and we know that one of the most important ceilings that we have in physiology is, for example, the VO2 max. So the more energy he has available, it means that then now we can do the Ironman specific training, which is the key training, but then at the same time we can also start working on other things as well that we know will help bring up the speed of his Ironman specific training as well.
So energy availability is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think to be honest, even in if you, I think that one of the things that one lose out on when one look at, for example, so what would be the very often what happens in sports is that people try to lose weight, for example. So maybe losing weight to improve their watts per kilogram ratio or something like this. The problem is that one of the things that we do see is that losing weight doesn't bring necessarily up your VO2 max. So if you look at VO2 per kilogram, you can maybe, depending of course a little bit where you are and so on, if you have a lot of excess fats on your body and so on. But normally what we do see is that if you're reducing your kilograms too much, we also see that actually your VO2 max actually ends up going down. So in Kristian, even in Norway, where we have very conservative guidelines for when it comes to, I'll say, losing weight or so on. Even when Kristian goes down towards 72, 73 kilograms, his absolute VO2 max, so measured just in milliliters per minute, actually goes down. So if he goes down, so actually he's more powerful in terms of VO2 with more weight on his body as well. And that's not only muscles, that's actually also a little bit extra fat on his body. 100% the reason for why we have been speculating and why we don't know 100% why, but you can imagine now that if you look away from that and you only quantify this as watts per kilogram, that would mean in his sense that as long as he was able to maintain, let's say, that target power that you are gauging your watts per kilograms again. So let's say it was your 20-minute power or something like this. From that perspective, he might be able to maintain the same power output for those 20 minutes. But from a watts per kilogram perspective, it looks better now because he has a lower weight. But because we know that his VO2 goes down, it basically means that he needs to fill that gap to hold the same power with more glycogen instead. So I think energy availability and how to say. Of course, you don't want to gain too much weight and all these kind of things, obviously. But I think that maybe there's a lot of people that could have gained some speed actually in the end by reducing the focus on how to say food, because the body is smart. If you start to restrict the food that you get into your body, so the calories you go into the body, well, those calories is basically what you're going to turn into power. And if you are restricting that, well, what happens short term maybe it's not so obvious, but maybe it becomes more obvious in the long term, and a lot of people struggle from that. So energy availability and having a program that where we how to say almost make the program based on calories, so that so that not only the ceiling of VO2 max, but also how to say the ability to burn a lot of calories during a week is important.
Olav, if you could give age group aspiring Ironman athletes looking to perform at their best across an Ironman distance, say a top tip around what you just shared there, what would, if they could do one thing, obviously their resources, they don't have access to testing and the close monitoring at times, or mostly, what would be your top tip on how they could optimize their, like you just shared, their energy availability and get the most out of their training?
I think first thing would be that what you're trying to do in training is, of course, to perform. You want to perform in your training, so create a stimulus, and hopefully you'll progress that stimulus, so you can go either a little bit longer or a little bit higher on the key sessions over a month. That means also for those sessions you need to fuel properly in front of it. You can't. I have a very hard time giving a general advice, at least, because maybe there would be specific cases, but like a general advice, I would always say that it's better to overfuel a little bit than underfuel leading into a session and also during the session, because if you have an energy deficit, it will also be very difficult to make a progress or progress in your training.
To adapt from that training stimulus.
not only adapt, but actually also even perform during training.
Yeah. Certainly from my line of work as a physiotherapist, energy availability, low energy availability is such a key driver for so many of the musculoskeletal conditions we see, particularly bone stress injuries. And it's known that the Norwegian program is high in volume. I'm always amazed and impressed that there's very little injuries amongst the ranks. I think Kristian's last significant injury, aside from a calf strain a year ago, was bone stress injury to his navicular circa 2014-15. So that indirectly alerts someone like myself that, well, the fueling must be pretty bang on to match the training workload. So credit to yourself and the team, Olav. In terms of, there's some specific questions, Olav, that have come through from some listeners for you. So I'm just going to throw to those because I think they'll bring up some key talking points here. Mick Ferris, an Australian triathlon coach, asks Olav, I'd love to know how much emphasis Olav puts on blood lactate levels and his opinion on the importance of having a sports scientist as part of a daily training environment. Mick runs an elite squad on the here in Australia. So what would be the response there, Olav?
I think, well, first to the injury, I think that's one of the reasons that why we have had no injuries is because we are very, careful about the intensity, or making sure that the intensity is correct on all the sessions. And one of the key metrics we use for that is actually lactate. So lactate concentration or lactate production, depending on what kind of session we are doing, is something that I closely monitor. Because it tells also where the really nice thing with lactate is that it actually tells how much energy that comes from the glycolysis. You're measuring also indirectly into the glycolysis. So for the importance of having a sports scientist in there, I think one of the successes we have had is that the difficulty if you have like somebody that is separate or has an individual role in the lab, so he does the lab testing and then he tries to bring it over to, let's say, a coach, and then a coach tries to make sense out of that and try to interpret it and bring that over to an athlete again. I think you're losing quite a lot on the way. That's one, and also it's not sure that even the coach is really understanding the whole or all the things or why things are. The research in the lab, he doesn't know the context that the athlete comes into the lab with, or who he is, what he so I think there are so many things lost in translation there, that one of the key strengths maybe that we have had is that I'm both running the lab testing and all these kind of things, but I'm also the scientist that are interpreting it and putting it into a bigger context. And at the same time, I'm also in the field coaching the athletes and doing the measurements on them. So I know, for example, for me, when I see the number on the lactate meter, for me, it's not a number. For me, it's something that goes into a context of what have Kristian done the day before? What is actually the session today? How important is it? What is the session tomorrow or the next days? That's for one. And also on top of that, I know what is the stimuli that Kristian needs. So, for example, now if Kristian goes and I see that he is going a little bit harder than maybe he should, but at the same time, so he would, but I know that this is actually what he needs. And today he feels fresh, so he is reporting that he really feels strong, he feels good. Then I would say, okay, fine. Then we use that. Then we shift a little bit the focus of the session towards that. That's the stimuli that he gets it, because today is the day, because it matches with his feeling and ability to maybe progress even. So it's not a fixed tool that just says, oh, this is the concentration, oh, you have to go lower, you have to go faster, because it's in a bigger context of what's the program and what's the stimuli that Kristian, Gustav, Kasper, and so on needs and that dictates a little bit what my next, or let's say what words I would choose when communicating that to Kristian, when I see, okay, this is a number, okay, let's let's continue. Or I say, okay, maybe slow down a little bit because tomorrow we have a more important session and you're already a little bit high. And it's not important that important to push it today on this session or something like this. So it is always in a context,
So it's not just the data collection, it's the application of that data and contextualizing it. You mentioned the feeling, and it's something that you see in the YouTube videos regularly. You'll get a lactate sample from one of the athletes' ears, Kristian, for example, and you'll say feeling. I think you use one word at times, feeling, and Kristian will report something. You said at the start of the show, Olav, that the ability to manage pace and know what intensity you're outputting at a perceptual level is a natural talent. So how much importance do you put on that rating of perceived exertion from the athletes? How much importance do you put on the feeling versus the numbers? I guess it's an algorithm, right?
No, it's not well, I wouldn't say it's an algorithm, but no, I'm not 100% sure if I got your question 100%, but
how important is the athlete's response to how they're feeling with what you're seeing?
Yeah, no, very important, because that goes equally. I would say that if I were giving a weighting to, let's say, to the number compared to the feeling, it would tip in favor of feeling. So if I had one number here telling me that maybe he should do this, but he is saying this instead, I would just say, okay, fine, we make a new measurement after the next interval just to check whether there maybe was an error in the measurement, because you don't know. Sometimes you don't know, because there can sometimes be only small errors in the measurements from small contamination from, let's say, small sweat, even though we are very meticulous in preparing and cleaning and all these kind of things. But feeling is the reason why I ask a feeling is, one, I want to have a reference to what is actually on the instrument I use for measuring. So let's say lactate in this case. And secondly is also to calibrate, let's say, the internal feeling. It's like, if you put a person into a room without windows and there was, natural light in that room. So you had like artificial natural light in that room. You take away the clock from them. They would very soon lose sense of time, even in that room. You would even lose sense of a minute, or starting to make quite, significant deviations from when is actually have a minute passed. Maybe you say after 1 minute, 10 seconds, you say, now it's a minute, or 50 seconds. This is individual. And the same goes even more for intensity. The funny thing is that Kristian, typically, if you take away the lactate meter and you don't use any kinds of objective measurements of intensity of him, he will drift upwards. He will start to go harder. Solveig also, she would just start to go harder. Lotte, harder. Gustav, he will start to go slower compared to what is, let's say, the if you were having a threshold session or lactate or LT2 session or maximum lactate steady state session or anaerobic threshold, whatever you call it. Gustav would drift, start to go slower compared to what he could have done. Kristian will start to go harder than what he should do. So in that sense, it's when you get the strength in having a lot of measurements is that you get a very high robustness in the measurements. And then you can tell something quite accurately about it, because it's not only about what's happened at that exact interval, but it's also how you see actually the energy system develop over time as well. For sure. Feeling is important for that interval, but in the bigger picture, numbers makes a big role then to what is happening to the program in the next phase.
So it's very important. David asks, have any of the athletes had issues tolerating nutrition during races and training? And if so, how have you dealt with this?
I think actually the biggest or no, it was not that, but it was not a big challenge that either. But I would say actually the biggest stomach issues we had was actually when looking at electrolyte balance in the fluids, how to say, in 2019 when preparing for our own test event leading into the Olympics. That was actually we had our own test event before the test event. So there we had I would say that was actually the biggest. When it comes to nutrition, I would say that we haven't had any big issues there. All the guys are using Morton, and even the girls are using Morton. And the benefit, of course, with Morton is that, you know, the difference between Morton and a lot of other carbohydrates is that it's encapsulated in this hydrogel, and that makes it very, how to say, nice to your both your teeth or mouth and everything, but it also makes you very nice. It goes very easy on your stomach too. So whether it's only based on that, I don't know, but in general, because they're also using quite a lot of carbohydrates in general, because we train so much, you can imagine that it's not only important to fuel on the sessions that are key, but it's also important to be fueled for the sessions that are key, because when you're doing sessions, you are always using glycogen. And if you then come glycogen or have a glycogen deficit going into a very important session, is maybe that's just the amount of deficit that made you stagnate or were not able to develop on the next session. Because when you are doing Olympic programs and so on, it's so demanding. If it hadn't been demanding, everybody could have done it. And that's the difference, of course. There are so many details and so many things that has to be automated or just go by itself. And I think one of those is that, fueling and making sure that you have enough carbohydrates. So that makes also I would say, because they're fueling in between the sessions, on the easy sessions also, it makes it, of course, the body more tolerant also to carbohydrates. So that's probably a benefit compared to maybe an age group that doesn't train that much. Maybe you can train like 6-7 hours a week, and then you only are using carbohydrate potentially on the hard sessions, or let's say the threshold, or let's say demanding sessions. That's maybe the only place they're using it. And then, of course, the stomach doesn't get the same time to acclimatize to say the higher carbohydrate concentration in your guts and in intestines.
So is that trainability of the gut that's possible?
For sure.
Olav, I just want to quickly check in for you. We can edit this out. What time do you have there at your end? I know we're at the end of the hour.
No, actually, I'm fine. Actually, I'm just sitting at the office today. I have to get home in a few hours time, because my wife is having her anniversary. So
your anniversary, wedding anniversary.
No. Birthday.
Oh, her birthday. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Oh, mate. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I reckon we'd maybe 15-20 minutes. Is that okay?
No problem. No, okay. That's fine. No problem. Yeah.
Okay. Here comes the next question, Olav. A listener questions come through, and that is around intensity distribution, the difference between standard distance, Olympic distance intensity distribution, i.e. the polarized, approach, and then the longer preparation. How has the intensity distribution varied between what you did for Tokyo and then what you did for Ironman Cozumel?
I would say that, there is a little bit of misunderstanding because we aren't doing a polarized model. I think what the training we do is actually a mixture. It can be pyramidal, it can be threshold, it can be polarized, it can be base, depending on what kind of, let's say, definition you're using. And if you look at the definition, the scientific definition of how polarized training was coined, we don't do polarized training per se, but yes, we also have weeks where it is polarized too, but it's not like our concept is built around polarized training and that's how we do it. It depends a little bit on what phase we are in, what we are working on, what the needs are, and so on. So how it changed actually after the Olympics is that from the Olympics, I would say that actually the training is more, of course, because of the volume, it can look a little bit like it is polarized oriented, but that's also a little bit depending on how you measure the intensity. But from the Olympics, where it was more, let's say, threshold oriented, it has maybe become more base, or call it pyramidal oriented.
Pyramidal as in, can you explain that, Olav?
So that means that you have some intensity at some, but little intensity at the higher intensities. And as you basically go down on intensity, you get more and more volume. So it looks more like a pyramid. If you take the zone 5, for example, on the top, or zone 6, whatever, on the top, and then zone 4, 3, 2, 1, you would basically see that if you then make some horizontal bars, that the bar for the zone 5, 6, or let's say call it VO2 max training, that's of course the least. Then there's a little bit more that goes above threshold. Then there is more at threshold, and then there are even more at, let's say, endurance, or let's say Ironman specific training. And then there is, the biggest volume is that intensity that goes below Ironman intensity. So in that sense, it's more pyramidal oriented. Yeah.
Yep. No, got it. Olav, final listener question here is: do the Norwegian team use commercially available software to record and monitor workloads, such as, for example, Training Peaks? And do they use metrics like Training Peaks CTL and ATL to track progression, or is it something different?
And yeah, well, both. Actually, over the last year, I've been with the athlete, or over the last years, I actually have been using both Training Peaks, today's plan, and intervals. But actually, the time I spend in Training Peaks or today's plan or these kind of things is limited to just putting in the workouts. Either I will put in a workout, or I put in the workout, and it's just writing the text that describes the training that we have planned. When it comes to the analytics, I use a mix. I can use WKO for something, I can use Golden Cheetah for something, and then we also have developed our own proprietary, our in-house tools that I use quite extensively to analyze the training and so on when it comes to individualization and these kind of things.
Okay, thank you. Olav, the technology side of things, it's been well documented, the suit, the Triathlon suit that was worn there in Tokyo, and the core body temperature sensors, the testing, that was very cutting edge and resulted in an unorthodox looking suit. The Australian commentators butchered their commentary about the white suit. It was very, I will say, disrespectful, but ironic, given that it was a suit that was worn to victory. So any sort of behind the scenes stories you've got around the development of that Triathlon suit?
Well, actually, if you look at the suit, you see if somebody had been swimming in a Speedo, nobody would arrest them. And actually, if you see there is almost what looks like a black Speedo underneath the suit. So in that sense, I wouldn't say they are more disrespectful than a swimmer. But no, when it comes to the suit itself, to be honest, I don't care about aesthetics when it comes to performance. Aesthetics has, I have to find the right context to put in, but in our context, I would say aesthetics has nothing to do with performance. And for us, the only thing that was important was performance. So when I started to lead the development of the Trimtech suit, what did we want to do, and so on, we also needed to find new methods actually to quantify the performance of the suit as well. So actually what we did was that we didn't use the core sensors as much to measure the core temperature, because they had a lot of sensors on the body. It was the cool thing with the core sensor is that it doesn't, a lot of people think that how it measures core temperature is that it uses, either they think that it's measuring the skin temperature and it applies some algorithm to offset, let's say, the difference between the skin temperature and your core temperature, or they think that it uses an offset. You know, you can buy these thermometers on the pharmacy where you can, like, you just scan the skin of the forehead of your head or the kids or in your ear, and then you get a number there. Even though we know that if you measure directly here, it's lower, but it uses an offset. Actually, how the core sensor does it is that, and this is the really cool thing about it, and this is actually one of the projects that we are running now, and we are developing much further from a calorimetric perspective too. And that is that the core sensor measures thermal power, or you could call it heat flux, but it measures. So you can imagine your power meter on the bike, it measures mechanical power. This one actually measures thermal power. So the way that it measures your core temperature is that it takes the skin temperature and it measures the thermal power. And now if you know the insulation value of something, you can say something about the heat of that comes from the core. It actually comes from industry. So you can imagine that if you put this on a window and on the outside of a window in a building, and you attached it there, and you knew the insulation value of the window, and you measure, okay, how warm is the window on the outside? You can't say anything about how hot it is inside, of course, because again, there can be a huge difference. But if you now measure the thermal power, so basically how much heat it actually radiates, in the same way that if you take a cooking plate and you put it to 2 kilowatts, if you took this sensor and it hadn't been made of plastic and you put it on a cooking plate, you would actually be measuring 2 kilowatts. And that's actually what it does. So we put it on inside here. So this is actually one of the methods that I have developed, and that was that we took these sensors. We took these sensors and put it around inside the body together with GreenTag. The scientists and people they have there are amazing. So they came up and helped even with the measurement, because I had a very close cooperation with them. But now we can measure how much thermal power actually the suit allowed us to dissipate. And there we saw a major difference between different suits. And there is where we found something that was quite nice together with TrimTex, and which still is, let's say, a secret, both in how we quantified it and measure it. But I think the difference is on the paper between the suits we tested, even the one that we used in the test event in 2019, which obviously wasn't bad, with Casper coming in second. There was still a significant difference between the new suit and the old suit. And of course, this is what we want to have on Kona or Cozumel and all these kind of things. And you can imagine that when Kristian runs the 2 last Ks of his Olympic race, and people are starting to reach the critical temperature, having a little bit better heat dissipation maybe allows you to go a little bit faster too.
Yeah, well, the results were there, and I certainly wasn't offended, because I grew up in the 90s running around doing triathlons in what we call DTs here in Australia, or Speedos. So
exactly.
I had no issues with it. It was I think the uninformed Australian commentators at the time, if I could say that. Just briefly, Olav, stride power meters. I know you implement those,
yep.
And also the Super Sapiens glucose monitors. Any sort of learnings you've had from implementing those devices?
I think for Stride, actually now we have a very close cooperation with them as well. GreenTag, or Core Body Temperature, they are a partner into the Sub 7 project. Stride is a partner into the Sub 7 project. They also worked with Eliud, for his Ineos 159 project. And what we are actually now developing together with Stride is mechanical power too. One thing that people are not too aware of is that actually what the Stride reports is actually what we call metabolic power. So it closely resembles your VO2 max with an efficiency, or let's say your calorimetry with an efficiency, and that's how it reports power. And that we actually started, I remember I started using already back when they had their very first prototype. But at that time, we put it on the shelf because it took away too many other metrics that we needed to have, because then it was like a heart rate strap. But then they came with the foot pod, and we started to validate it again in the laboratory. And one of the things that shocked me was how accurate it was for our athletes. So accurate that it basically has the same accuracy as when you look at the power alone, I would say it has the same accuracy that power meters on the bike are listed for, so 1 to 2%. Now, but of course, the problem with when you report metabolic power is that what I also do is that I don't measure VO2 max. I don't measure VO2 max for the sake of understanding performance, or how to say, I do it from understanding performance, but I don't measure VO2 max to determine performance. I don't measure the fraction utilization of oxygen to determine performance, but to understand performance. And the difference is that the best way to gauge performance is by going just, okay, what speed can you hold on an Ironman? What speed can you hold in Olympic distance triathlon? What's your power output? Because it makes no sense to sit on an ergometer and then push power, and then you try to understand the performance from a VO2 max perspective, which is even further away from your performance than speed is, or power. Power is closer to speed than calorimetry is. So calorimetry for me is a way to gauge the biochemical efficiency. So if you probably heard about the term, of course, you're familiar with the term gross efficiency, but that's basically looking all the way from calorimetry to speed. But in between there also have power, so mechanical power. And if you now, for example, can measure mechanical power on the running, now you can also understand, one, how good is your biochemical efficiency, not only fresh, but when you're fatigued in different climates and these kind of things. But you can also understand how much is biomechanical efficiency. So basically the conversion from mechanical power to speed as well. So the Stride is a tool not only for, let's say, intensity control and having more detailed data on the performance, but it's equally also much a tool that we use in the assessment also to understand where are the gains to be made with these athletes. Do we need to focus on trying to do something with the heat mechanical power relationship? Is it biomechanical? It is, or is it just plain straight normal training to that will make the athletes faster? So yeah, glucose wise, I would say that personally, I don't use the data very extensively. That would be more like if, for example, we had one case, for example, with one of our athletes leading up to it was in Font-Romeu, but leading up to the Olympics. And there he was feeling quite flat for a few days. And that was actually quite interesting, because then the athlete mentioned to me, hey, look here, look at the data. Also, my glucose levels is a little bit lower than normal, or lower than normal. And in those cases, it is interesting to look at it. But when it comes to fueling and all these kind of things, we have so good protocols from the laboratory and how we work that will always surpass data from our glucose meter. Not only that, but also because of some of the limitations that are with that technology compared to But sure, it's super interesting data. We've never had this kind of real-time access to glucose data anytime, or how say in the past for athletes this readily available. So of course that makes it very interesting, because it makes us also, it gives one more metric into the whole picture that we can look at to look at trends and maybe explain why things went the way they went. But besides that, I'm not using it like a day for daily use or these kind of things to adjust anything and so on. It's more, let's say, something that can give us some insight.
A tool. Olav, thank you for sharing there. We ask every guest of the show several set questions, and the first would be this: if you could boil everything you've learned through not only your sports science years, your coaching years, but also your engineering background. There's been quite a background you've had here, Olav, into one single piece of advice to help the listener of this show. It's a very broad question: perform at their physical best. What would Olav's single piece of advice be?
My question will be, what level would I be at? But no, one single best advice would be: there will always be tough days. And when it then is tempting to lay down on the couch or just not do anything, always think of what would you have done if you were the best, or if you are going to be the best. And very often, everybody are going to have bad days. Everybody are going to have injuries, or I'll say some kind of injury or sickness or these kind of things. And then trying to make the best out of those situations too is probably where I would say, for like a general advice that makes you go. There is some truth to I think, was it Malcolm Gladwell that wrote the book, the 10,000 hour rule, something like this. Of course, some people say no, that's not true, or nothing like that, but there is a lot of truth to it. Practice makes master. And I think that the difference between, how to say, being the best and second best can in many cases be that the best was good at taking even, how to say, those bad situations also and turning them into quality work. Because that forces me to just do something different, but that makes me then I put quality on this now that I haven't had opportunity to do before. But I think that's a key takeaway.
Brilliant. Olav, every guest issues a physical challenge to the listeners as well. So what is Olav Aleksander Bu's physical challenge for the week going to be?
Like a one time, or many, or like to implement daily for them, or weekly or whatever.
You know what? Let's go with that. I think because you've got so much to offer. So let's glean from your wisdom. And what would be an ongoing physical challenge for endurance athletes to think about?
Even just running 10 minutes a day makes it so much easier to ramp up the training when you have the motivation to do it than skip training. So just get out, run even 10 minutes that in a way that you don't even get sweaty, because just keeping the body, how to say, in the routine and how to say, impacting your legs, your skeleton, everything. So even if it's only 5-10 minutes a day, out easy running, that you even don't have to go into the shower after, just do it, because it makes it so much easier to ramp up your training when you want to start running. So it makes it also much easier for the head to just know, okay, I'm just going to go out and run around my house 2 times and then I'm back in. If it's that, do it.
Yeah. Wow. I've got friends in Australia here who are up to their 1,798th day today, I believe, of running 5Ks a day.
Oh, wow.
So it makes me think of asking you this, Olav. Kristian's spoken about it and it's documented in the videos. He'll often go out for a walk in the altitude of Sierra Nevada. What's the purpose of that? Is that just conditioning for the body, durability?
I would say there are many things to it. One is, of course, to keep the circulation in the body. So circulating, of course, or let's say increasing the circulation compared to if you just were laying down on the couch, especially after maybe some very heavy training or so. But keeping up the energy expenditure, so we don't lose that. But I think also one aspect that one can't forget is that you can't separate psychology physiology. I think all athletes will perform the best when they are happy, and I'll say, yeah, play is really underestimated or undervalued in even at the highest level in the world. And when athletes can just go out and have a walk and clear their mind and listen to some music and just feel okay, maybe you don't want to go there and then, but then, immediately after you go out and you started to get the fresh air and you're starting to enjoy yourself. And I think this is super important.
Geez, that's powerful, the importance of play. I must ask, what do you think is Kristian Blummenfelt's greatest strength? This can be psychological or physiological, but what do you think sets him apart? You've worked with some amazing athletes. What sets Kristian apart?
It's difficult to pick one, but one thing that maybe he is an athlete that is really nice to work with because he is so specific also in the feedback. So it makes it very simple to work as a strong team. It's not like it's not when I'm coaching him or writing a program that I know everything. So a lot of the time I sit down and discuss with him the content of the program, and let's say first the philosophy, what we want, what we would try to develop and work on, and he would I think his interaction, his ability to understand his body and give feedback. It's like I like very often to use the analogy where he is, they say, the Formula One driver and I'm the engineer. And then basically he can come back and give me so specific feedback for how he feels the car on the track and so on, that allows me to be very specific on where I think I need to tune the car or the engine and so on to make it go a little bit faster.
Could you give an example of what Kristian might say? Like you'll say feeling, or what will he actually respond with, to give you that level of granularity?
So it's so many things that it's picking one. I have to think a little bit. But for example, I remember there are also some new stuff now that we are working on when it comes to running efficiency and development of new shoes and stuff. But it would be where he would basically be so specific that in the running, when we try to develop something and he says, I feel I lack a little bit here, and it's because I'm not able to engage that muscle properly. And then we can go into the training and look at how would we make the training session. Even you could use some elevation or inclination or other things, or track sessions and so on, to really start to work specifically on that characteristics. But there are so many examples that it's difficult to pick one.
Well, thank you. Obviously, it's a big 12 months plus coming ahead for yourself, Kristian. The 2 Ironman World Championships happening in 2022, St. George in May, Kona in October, and then of course sandwiched in the middle, the sub 7 hour attempt for the Ironman distance. And I think the triathlon and endurance world's eyes open with the 7:21:12 that there's a distinct possibility. It's a loaded question, but is sub 7 doable, Olav?
To the extent that we're actually to the extent that I think it's with some radical changes, but within the rules of Ironman, even possible to do it solo. Wow. But that requires some radical changes to the bike, but within the rules. Still within the rules, but radical change to so with pacers, Kristian can already go, I think, on the right day, right course, everything being perfect. I think he can go 7:15 with, I'll say, already today with the current setup, and with some radical changes, I think going under 7 hours solo, I think actually is doable for Kristian.
Olav Aleksander Bu, you have been very generous with your time and also generous with your knowledge and share-ins. People ask, they comment, they talk, what makes the Norwegian team so good? I think we've had a little insight today into some of the behind-the-scenes mechanics. So thank you. Thank you very much. And we wish you all the best for this exciting upcoming 12 months plus.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It was really fun.
Let's go.